In today's episode, I am sharing my experience with the silent boundary method. This method was something I started about 5 years ago, and it has worked miracles in my relationships, especially the one I have with myself. And I can't wait to share it with you. Let's get started. Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of the Live Mindfully podcast, the podcast that invites us all to pause, take a deep breath, and show up as the most mindful, most wholehearted version of ourselves that we can each day. I want to start today with a grounding. So take a nice deep breath in and sigh it out. Start to connect with your body. Bring your attention to your feet. If you are standing or walking, feel the foot connected to the surface beneath you. If you are driving or seated at a desk or engaged in any other activity, simply notice your feet. Feel grounded through them. Feel strong through the legs. Draw the lower part of the belly back toward the spine and sit or stand a little taller. Feel the spine lengthening. Lift through the back of the neck and bring the chin parallel to the ground. Feel the hands. Relax the jaw. And gently open and close the hands a few times. Take another deep breath in. Open the mouth and sigh it out. Good. Okay. So we have arrived. What is the purpose of setting boundaries? First and foremost, it is really hard to set boundaries when we are not grounded, because when we aren't grounded, it is easier, at least in our own minds, to say yes to something and work out how we're going to make this fit later than it is to say no and justify that response. And usually what happens is we feel caught off guard. So why do we set boundaries? We do this so others know how we want to be treated. It's as simple as that. And 9 times out of 10, if you are feeling like you are being mistreated or you are feeling resentment, little bit of a statement that's going to hit hard here, that is because you haven't let people know around you by your behavior how they should treat you. So definitely there are going to be people in our life who are trying to take advantage, but the majority of people are marrying into what they believe is appropriate behavior with you. So what we want to do to change this is normalize 2 things. The first is getting comfortable not just with saying no. The likelihood is you are the kind of person who quite regularly just says yes and then tries to work it out later. So you want to normalize saying no, but more importantly than that, you want to normalize saying no without justifying your response. So you're probably really good at saying no when there is an actual reason why you can't do something. But when it comes to saying no to something because it really is going to create stress in your life, but you don't have like a definitive oh, I can't do that, I'm actually out of the country. When you don't have something like that, you struggle because you're trying to justify your response. And this is really difficult because intuitively we usually want to give people more information. That's on us again. We do that. We choose to give them more information than they need or deserve or probably even want. And we do that because of how we want them to perceive us. We don't want to be perceived as unkind or unhelpful. And the reality is this makes us feel really uncomfortable. And we don't really want to be judged for saying no when we feel as though we don't have a good enough reason to say no. So instead we say yes. The second thing that we want to normalize is creating a pocket of space before saying yes. So this one might actually be a little bit easier. And to do that, we need a one-liner. And I use this one-liner now. What we want to do is we want to become so comfortable with saying this one-liner that it exits our mouths before we've even had a chance to think about it. And we want to do this when we're asked to do something that we just aren't sure if we really want to commit to it just this minute. And it's as simple as saying something like, you know what, I just need to check a couple of things, I'll let you know. Or we might say something like, look, straight off the bat, I probably can't make that work, but I'll come back to you if I can. And then when you have had some time to think about it, you can choose to let them know or not. If it is really something you don't want to do or something you simply don't have time to consider right now, just say that line. I have a lot on my plate this week and for the next month. You could say I'm playing catch up right now. I don't have capacity. But if you don't feel comfortable saying that, use the one-liner that creates a pocket of space. Look, I'm going to need to think about that. I'm not sure. And you'll notice with all of these sentences, I'm not actually handing any information over. They're very generalized. I don't play games with giving anyone specifics anymore. I don't need to justify my choices. I don't need to tell people exactly what I'm doing. I've really come to a place where in my mind it's none of their business, and it's none of my business if someone says no to me. If someone says, look, I can't make that work, I go, yeah, no worries. In fact, I'm so comfortable with my own boundary setting now that when I ask someone to do something for me, I preface that with, I know you're really, really busy, so if this is a no, no hard feelings. Just let me know. It's totally fine. And if I say to someone now, like I've practiced this so many times, that if I say to someone now, I can't make that work, that's the end of it. No one comes back, no one pushes, no one asks for more information, no one says to me, well, why not? It's accepted. Well, she said no, that's the end of it. And it's the same with normalizing saying no without justifying my response. And so you might be thinking, well, how is this a silent boundary? Like I have to still say no. And I have to still say, I'll have to come back to you if it's a yes. This becomes a silent boundary as time goes on. So in the beginning, yeah, you're going to need to practice saying no, and you're going to need to physically say no. But as time goes on and people become more familiar with what is a yes and what is a no and what is she's probably going to say she needs time to think about that. When people become familiar and accustomed to that being your response, you'll no longer need to set a boundary there. You'll no longer need to let them know, because they'll become used to it. So let's use an example. Let's say you don't want to work weekends anymore. You've done it for a really long time. Your boss has really become accustomed with saying to you, hey, I'm going to need you to work over the weekend. You are going to have to say in the beginning, And you might start off with, look, I'm happy to do it this weekend, but I just want to let you know, moving forward, weekends are family time and I don't have capacity to work them anymore. You're going to have to deal with the feelings that come up. You might start to think that your boss is going to perceive you as a non-team player. They might. But you need to be okay with that if it means you get to uphold your boundary of not working weekends anymore. And as time goes on, this will become a boundary that doesn't get crossed because you're going to maintain that boundary. And it'll get to a point where your boss won't even bother asking you. They'll simply find a workaround, which might be they need to push a deadline. I had a boss many moons ago who required me to stay back until 6. She just said that to me basically from the beginning of the job. She was like, just so you know, I need you to stay back until 6. And I was kind of okay with that initially because I figured there was a reason behind it. But as time went on, I realized that a lot of the time I was just sitting there waiting for the clock on my computer to hit 6 so I could get up and say, okay, I'm out of here. And so one day I decided, my heart was racing, that I wanted to address this with her. And so I went about it professionally. I scheduled in a meeting, and when that time came around, I very politely asked why it was a requirement that I be there until 6, especially when most people had left for the day. Now, before I went into this meeting, I spent some time thinking about her responses to that question and what my follow-up questions or what my answers might be. I didn't want to go in and be blindsided. I didn't want to have this conversation several times over. I was incredibly uncomfortable about having this conversation in the first place, but I felt like I was being taken advantage of, and I was really starting to resent this person. And so I asked that question, and she responded, well, it shows the bosses that we're dedicated to our work. And I think she thought that was going to be it. She gave me that answer, and that was all she said on it. And I took a deep breath and I said, okay, but they all left at 4 p.m. and they all leave at 4 p.m. So they're not seeing me sit here until 6. And she was blindsided. And then she became quite off-sided with me. And I think, again, that she had just expected me to accept that answer and move on. So she followed up with, well, it's a requirement of your job. And I said, well, contractually, I'm actually only required to work to 5 p.m. with the odd requirement for me to stay back for functions here and there. And she said, well, I might have things that I need you to do last minute. And I said, okay, look, I appreciate that. And on those occasions, I'm more than happy to leave a little bit later. But I just want to let you know, moving forward, I'm going to finish at the same time as everybody else. I'm not going to lie to you, she was not happy. But eventually, she did come to expect that I would complete my day's work and leave at 5 p.m. She didn't need me there until 6. She simply wanted me to be there. And eventually I came to feel like it was a control thing. That's what I felt. And that's one of the reasons why I felt resentment, because if she could keep me there till 6, she felt empowered. So I set a boundary, and it became silent because I didn't continue to reinforce the boundary by saying to her, look, I'm leaving. Like I've said before previously, I'm going to be leaving at 5. It came to 5 o'clock. I closed down my computer. I said goodbye to her and I left. I didn't address it again. She didn't address it again. It became a silent boundary. And I reinforced that boundary with my actions. I didn't negate. I stood my ground, and I silently reinforced that boundary every single day. And that's how it becomes a silent boundary, because in the beginning it feels uncomfortable and perhaps it needs to be spoken. I could have just started getting up and leaving at 5. And that was definitely well within my rights. I could have said, everything's done for the day, I'm going to head off. And she might have countered by saying, well, hang on, I need you here till 6. And then I would have needed to say, yeah, but I've done everything, so I don't need to be here. I wanted to be an adult about it and be professional and sit down and have a conversation with her. But to be honest, I don't think that served me in any way. In a lot of instances, you won't need to do that. You won't need to actually schedule a meeting and have a conversation. But it will be a case of you saying no and getting comfortable with not justifying that and not giving a response. And there will be times where you need to normalize. In fact, it should just become part of your vernacular to tell people, I'm going to have to come back to you. And whether you do or not doesn't necessarily matter. Don't normalize going back to people, because unless they actually need a response, they will know that it's a no by the fact that you haven't come back. And you might think, oh, that makes me look like a bad person, or I don't want them to think poorly of me. That's a little bridge that you're going to need to overcome, because the reality is they don't and they won't. In the beginning, they might, but they're just going to come to a point where they accept that you're living your life. And the other thing that you need to normalize is the other side of the boundary. For many of us, we are always asked to do more, to take on more, to attend more, and often we're just expected to roll over and suck it up. We've created that illusion in people that they're going to expect us to do that because that's what we've done. So when we do say no for the first time, we are going to catch people by surprise. When we tell people, when we set a boundary, they may be disappointed. They may get upset. This is normal, especially if they are used to you complying. So you also need to normalize letting them have their response. But remember, their displeasure is not something you have to own. With learning boundaries, with learning to say no, learning to stand up for ourselves, we get to trade the feelings of resentment and frustration that we carry from always being asked to do more for the discomfort of upsetting and disappointing others. If we learn to expect and accept that this is going to happen, if we anticipate it, just as I did with my boss, I knew she was not going to be happy with me. Because it's going to happen as we navigate this new version of ourselves. But we need to not see other people's responses as proof that we can't set boundaries. We need to understand that we are adjusting to a new way of doing something, and that other person is doing the same. We have to have compassion for ourselves, yes, and for others. That this is going to be a difficult time of adjustment and an adjustment period that they weren't expecting, We have to accept that it isn't going to be an easy road, but it is going to be a road worth traveling, because in time it is going to become a lot easier for you to do this, and it is going to become a silent boundary, a boundary that you set that makes you feel good about who you are. Maybe not in the beginning, but eventually. It's going to create pockets of space where you can breathe in your life and where you can ground. And most importantly, it is one of the best ways that reinforces self-love. Every time you engage in behavior like this, it tells you that you matter. It tells you that your choices matter, your time matters, that you matter to you. And I can promise that in time, people will get on board, and it doesn't negatively impact relationships in any way. It doesn't damage anything that wasn't already damaged in the first place. And if there are repercussions that lead to disrespect, know that you were already being disrespected and possibly micromanaged by this person. So the relationship with this person was already damaged and not by you. 2 things. 3. Let's call it 3. 3 things. Normalize saying no without justification or without specific reasons as to why. Normalize creating space before giving an answer. I'll need to check the diary, and if I can do it, I'll come back to you. And number 3, normalize letting the other person have their feelings without you taking them on board. Have a fantastic rest of the day. Let's take another deep breath in and sigh it out. Can you believe we are in week 8 of term 1? This is crazy how fast this year is going, which is another reason why you need to buy back time by doing the things that you really enjoy. If you get the chance, please rate, review, follow this podcast. I'll be back again next week. Until then, take good care of yourself.